So what do we do if we are bitter at another person because of something they have done or said? Well, in our last devotional, I said we should try our best to understand them. What is it that is motivating their behavior? Today, we're taking it one step down the road a little bit further, and we're thinking about this. Choose to forgive them. Whatever order I would have mentioned forgiveness in, you can't deal properly with bitterness without forgiving the person who has hurt you in some way. Now, by forgive, I want to be clear on something. When you forgive a person, you're not saying that what they did was no big deal. You're not saying that it didn't matter. You're not saying that it didn't hurt you. Listen, friend, the fact that you have to forgive them means that it was a big deal. It does matter, and it did hurt you. And yet, forgiveness is a necessary step that we must take anytime someone has offended us. Now, keep in mind, sometimes a person can offend us and they don't even know that they've offended us. Sometimes a person offends us and they do know it because they intended to forgive us. But whatever the case was there, we have to make a choice to forgive the person who has hurt us, whether they ask for the forgiveness or not. Remember this, forgiveness is not primarily between you and that person. Forgiveness is between you and God. I'll take it one step further. When you forgive a person who has hurt you, I would advise you not to tell them that you have forgiven them. Because if you tell them, all they're going to say is, what do you mean you forgave me? I didn't do anything wrong. And you're the one who did everything wrong. Well, then it's just going to be the forgiveness is something that takes place in your heart before the Lord. Now, if they have asked you to forgive them, and in the past you have told them you'll never forgive them, well, then you would need to go back and say, hey, I do forgive you, and I'm sorry that I didn't forgive you earlier. So I'm asking you to forgive me for not forgiving you earlier. So in that case, you might need to tell them that. But if they don't, for sure, if they don't even know that they've offended you, you would just be picking a fight by telling them that you have forgiven them. And even if they probably know it, but they've not asked for forgiveness, don't tell them that. I mean, just let that be between you and God and in your heart. And so forgiveness is an act of the will whereby we say to God, God, you know what they have said, you know what they have done, you know how badly it hurts me. But God, I choose to forgive them. Did you know in the Greek language, the word forgiveness literally means to send away or to let go? The word picture is that of a bird in a cage. And here you have a bird trapped in a cage, and you walk over and you open the door, and the bird flies out. Well, that's a theomy is the Greek word for that. You have released that bird, and you've let it go free. Well, when we forgive somebody, what are we doing? We're opening the door and we're letting the bird be free. There's a sense in which we're letting the other person off the hook. That's what there's not a sense. That is what's happening. We're opening the door of that cage and we're letting that person off the hook. We're letting them free. But there is another sense when we open that cage door that we set ourselves free. Because when we forgive somebody and we say, God, here's the thing that helps me. Anytime that I've ever had to deal with this, I am so aware of my own sinfulness and how many times in my life God has and does forgive me of my sins that I probably find it easier to forgive people than somebody else might, just because I'm just so incredibly aware of my own shortcomings and my own sinfulness. And how many times I have had to ask God to forgive me and still do something. Regularly I have to say, God, I guess every day I'm asking God to forgive me for something I thought, said, or an attitude, or just, not being as committed as I should. So I'm always wanting to examine my heart. The Lord's Prayer, Jesus taught us that we should regularly pray and ask God to forgive us. So for me, it's a little bit easier to say, God, you have forgiven me of so many things. I choose to forgive them. I let them go. I release them. I let them off the hook. And God, not only that, I ask you to bless them, and I ask you to be good to them. So again, when you forgive them, you're not condoning their behavior. You can't condone sin, yours or anybody else's. And you're not saying it wasn't a big deal. But what you are saying is, God, freely I have received your forgiveness, and freely I extend that same forgiveness to somebody else. And so today, Don't just listen to this devotional and say, well, that was interesting. We do need to forgive. If there's somebody that you're holding a grudge toward right now, what you ought to do when this devotional is over is bow your head and pray. And if you're home and you can, get down on your knees and say, God, I today, by an act of my will, am choosing to forgive this person for what they've done. And I will not hold on to this grudge any longer. I forgive them. I release them. I let it go. And when you do that, you know what you're going to experience? You're going to feel like the weight of the world has been lifted off of your shoulders, because you've been carrying something that God never intended you to carry. You've been carrying unforgiveness, and God wants to free you of that weight and that burden. Forgive them today and be free.